Should I do my Yeah, I'm talking. This should work. Cool. Did you post this on? Okay, so. I think that would get a laugh out of you, Phil. All right, cool. I think we're good to get started. Welcome to URUG, everyone. Just tell you a little bit about myself real quick. My name is Jason Carter. I'm a software engineer at MavenLink. We are a cloud-based software and services company that transforms how businesses do work with distributed teams, contractors, and clients. But really, that's kind of marketing speak. What you need to know is that we're a really awesome, solid engineering team with great practices, and that we're hiring mids and seniors with the hope that if we get a couple of those, we can bring on a couple more juniors. So we're looking to expand quite a bit in the next 6 months or so, but it's an awesome company. I went to DevPoint Labs as well about 3 years ago, so I've been doing Ruby for roughly 3 years, 2 years professionally. And I'm a skier, and I have a season pass to Snowbird, so if anyone wants to go there, that's where I'll be.
We should honestly do a URUG ski day. I think that'd be awesome.
I'm super down for that. I'll start a channel and Slack right away.
There's all of these local ski resorts for links for them are on Ruby.
Oh, sick. All right, cool. Awesome. So without further ado, this talk is about Pry. In any software engineer's life, you have bugs that will happen, whether it's from testing gaps or human error, any kind of side effects that you didn't necessarily think about in a complex system, and of course, in the case of Half-Life, which this talk leans heavily on, Black Mesa incidents. And what sucks about them is it takes a long time to figure it out a lot of times. You have to look through a lot of different areas. If you have a bunch of different objects that touch that code or that are involved in some transaction, it takes hours sometimes to find something simple or not simple. And if you're a Ruby developer, you would probably use Pry.
And if you don't, stop what you're doing.
And use Pry immediately. Yeah, just give up. You're done with Ruby.
That's better.
Yeah. So is everyone here familiar with Pry? Does anyone not know what that is? Cool. Well, I'll explain to you a little bit more about it then.
I'll get into too much detail. Just look it up.
Well, it's part of the talk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, because I was the only one that.
Well, I like to know kind of how familiar everyone is. So Pry is an alternative to the standard IRB shell that comes with Ruby. And what you really need to know is that it is what is called a REPL. So REPL stands for print, evaluate, or rather read, evaluate, print loop. And so what this allows you to do is be able to get input from a user, actually run it, and then print out a result, and then kind of keep yourself in a loop. And so that lets you stop execution at any point in a program and be able to actually kind of mess around with live data there in a way that lets you, tinker with stuff, find bugs, etc. In a Rails app, it's all gemified like most great Ruby tools. And so you can use, there are two gems that you'll typically want to use. One is called Pry and one is Pry Bybug. Pry Bybug specifically is what allows you to kind of stop in the middle of a Rails app with finding.pry. Or in some versions, you type Bybug. But you can use Pry in vanilla Ruby apps, and my examples here will all be just in a vanilla Ruby app, no Rails involved, mainly because a lot of the, doing it in like a proper large-scale Rails app where it's maybe most useful, often it makes the example a little harder to kind of understand and work through. Yeah, they're on Slack right now. There's a GitHub repo. If you want to even contribute to it, that's cool if you want.
So we're recording this too. So.
Yeah, so if you're like us at MavenLink, you probably use like Puma or Unicorn or something. Pry doesn't really work very well on that, and that has to do with how Unicorn's workers. It'll just kind of time out, and you won't ever actually be able to stop execution. So Rails servers the best way. I know you can configure some other web servers to work with it. I haven't gotten around to doing that.
Powder and Puma Dev work fine with it too.
Sweet. So get off Unicorn, go to Puma.
So when you say run Rails S, I mean, I run Rails S and I run Spoon.
Oh, sure. I guess what I mean here is then WebBrick. Yeah, WebBrick, like Ben says, you can get it working with other servers. At work, we use Uniform. We can get that working pretty easily.
You can always use Pry remote too
If you're in something with like multi-threads. And to, the basics are to toss a binding.pry in your code somewhere and call that code, either through the web or through your console or whatever. So if you're like me, originally when you started programming, this is how you use Pry. You throw bindings everywhere that you possibly can. Say, I know there's a problem here somewhere, like head crabs aren't being killed fast enough. So let me toss Pry at the top and see if that messes something up. Okay, I'm gonna hit continue and see if it's somewhere in the loop. Okay, continue. Okay, maybe it's at the end of the loop. But hopefully by the end of this talk, you'll learn some new ways that you can use Pry effectively rather than just throwing bindings in everywhere. All right, so the first thing that you got to know is how to get help in Pry. All you have to do is type help, go figure. And you can also type help before a command to learn more about it. So probably one of the most interesting commands in Pry is the what the fuck command. And it shows you lines of the backtrace of your most recent exception, and you can actually, it'll show you, help will show you the options. So you can do verbose if you want to show the full backtrace. You can actually add more exclamation points and question marks to see more lines. Defaults to 2, I believe. Can't remember, 2 or 3. But so that's like an example of how you use help. And literally when I was preparing this talk, that's pretty much how I got most of my information, was just help and saying help on a bunch of commands and seeing what was available to me. If you're wanting to run shell commands, say you want to, in this case, look for any Ruby processes that are running. If you're in a Pry session, you can just say dot in front of the command, and you'll be able to actually run any shell command that you want there. So in this case, I'm searching for Ruby processes, so that's kind of helpful. You can just keep Pry running. You don't have to have another tab or pane open for yourself to do your migrations or what have you. There's also the underscore command, which is similar to IRB. In fact, I know it's an IRB. A lot of times when you're messing around with Pry, what you're trying to do is like maybe build like a quick little method or like find some user. And what you'll do is you'll maybe write out some code, and then you realize, okay, cool, I finally got what I was looking for. I want to assign this to a variable of some kind. And so what you can do is underscore will actually just replay whatever the last thing is that you did. Create an array of weapons in Half-Life 2, running it to the weapon types variable, so that I can then kind of play around with that later. All right, so those are like the most basic of Pry commands. A little bit more about some of the interesting stuff. So these are called context methods, mainly because they allow you to more about where you're at in your program and find out more about the objects and things that are available to you in the program where you have stopped execution. So the big ones we're going to talk about are CD, ls, Pry backtrace, watch, and where am I think. I might have covered others. These slides change. But let's start with where am I, because you'll probably do this a lot. If you're messing around with Pry and jumping in different contexts, you often want to be able to just find out where you're stopped and where your code is at the moment, where you have actually bound. And so if you type where am I, it will just show you all the code around your binding. So in this case, we're in this play Ravenhold method. Find method is pretty handy in that you can kind of, maybe you see a method being called somewhere and you're not sure if it's a method on an instance or it's a method available, like maybe it's a Rails thing, you don't really know. Find method actually lets you search through your code to find methods, go figure. So there's a few different flags. I'm showing kind of 2 examples here. One is with the -C. I'm actually searching through the text of the method. So in this case, I searched for true, and you'll see that I got object and object delegate class because they have true in the text. And as well as head crabs alive. I can also just search by a method name and see where that's defined and how that, where that comes from. Probably the most important ones I would say personally to know that are really useful are CD and LS. So if you've used a Linux or Unix terminal, these should be familiar to you. Ruby developers you'll have. it allows you to change into the context of some object or class or something. So in this case, I have an instance of Freeman, and I can CD into it, and you'll notice that on the line 2, you can see like where you're at currently. If I type ls, it'll actually list out all the different things that are on that method or on that instance. So in this case, methods, variables that might be set on it, as well as any local variables. And I believe that's typically Pry or things that you set in the session a lot of times. Or
Is that going to show public interface or private?
it'll show both. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And what's really cool about this is that you then are in the context of that object, that instance, and you can also go into a class if you wanted to just explore a class. And so you can access the methods and the variables there as you would were you in that instance. So this includes private methods, which is kind of cool in that you can call private methods from here that you wouldn't be able to necessarily if you were debugging, because you are within the context of the object itself.
Can you only CD into instances of objects that are where you're stopping your code, or can you CD into the string object?
So you can CD into things that are in your code, but you could also CD into, like, you could create a string right there and CD into that if you want to. You can also CD into the class rather than just an instance. So maybe I've done that a lot where I'm like, oh, you know, I'm in a Rails controller and I know I have a request object, and I forgot, how do I get the IP address of the user off the request object? So I can go into there and find it, you know. And I'll show you some cool things you can do with LS to find more stuff. Because as you can imagine, in a Rails app, for example, LS is going to include all the superclasses and modules that are included in that object. So if you were to just go into, you know, your controller and type LS, you get this giant, huge trace of stuff. Most of it, it's not super helpful for you. So LS has a few flags. If you only remember 2 of them, I would say remember quiet and grep. So quiet just shows you all the methods defined on an object. So that means, you know, if I have a controller, I don't really necessarily care about all the things that Rails gives, you know, controller objects that I'm inheriting. I really just care about my controller methods, and so I would use ls-q. On top of that, you can also do ls-g in order to grep, and that works as you would expect in grep, allowing you to search through methods and find stuff that you're interested in. But there's a few more, right? Like globals, locals, constants, instance methods. I mean, there's tons. So if you ever find yourself wanting to find a specific thing when you're LSing, just type help ls and find out which flag is going to work best for you. So here's a couple examples of ls versus ls-q. So in this case, I have a class that Gordon Freeman inherits from called FPS guy. And I don't really care about that stuff. I'm only interested in the Gordon Freeman class itself. And so if I do ls-q, you'll see that the FPS guy disappears. Again, especially in Rails, really, really helpful so you're not just overwhelmed with this giant list of methods and various things. ls-g, in this case, I'm doing grep, and I search for grenade, and I can see both the method that involves that and an instance variable. So also super handy, maybe you don't necessarily know where some property is coming from or a method is coming from on an object or like in your wherever you've stopped, maybe you can CD into a bunch of stuff and you know, check and just search around. This is also really helpful, in my opinion, when you are working with a third-party library of some kind, where maybe you have installed some GitHub client, or more likely at work you have a gem that, like, we are using Tire for Elasticsearch right now, and that's actually been deprecated, and it's called Retire now. Don't ever use this, but we're locked on that version. And so documentation for it is kind of slim, so a lot of times you can just go in and say ls and find out. And with that, we'll see kind of some more stuff around that in a little bit. Yeah. So another thing that's important is, just like in actually, maybe I even talk about this. No, I don't. Just like in your terminal, if you do cd ... that'll pull you back up to whatever context you came from. Maybe make a change, even like, say the problem that I had in my code is that he had a really shitty weapon and I want to change that. I could go in and set weapon on the instance and then come back and continue execution. That would have been changed. It's just, yeah, cool. Pry backtrace gives you shows you all the and I showed it in this, kind of a small thing. You can see at the bottom. There's my talk code. As you can imagine, a Rails app this gets huge because you are going through a lot of different layers: action dispatch, action controller, all that stuff. But it can be helpful. I still have been looking to find a way to kind of filter this out, grep it. Maybe I'll submit a pull request to the gem, or maybe there's something I haven't figured out. Just see stuff in your application, like in your actual application directory, would be really cool. So yeah. All right, watch is another one that I haven't used a ton, but seems pretty helpful. This lets you watch the value of an instance variable or really anything. So in this case, I'm watching weapon, and what I can do is see when that changes. It'll notify me that it got changed to something. So this is handy. Maybe you've got like some object that's being changed at some point, right? Like, there's maybe a bunch of different callbacks that could act on it. And so what you would do is watch that, and then you can kind of step through and see at some point, oh, sweet, it got hit. Ergo, it helps you kind of narrow down the problem. So that's pretty handy. And that's kind of a lot of the context methods. Any questions on those?
You only watch variables, or can you watch code execution with blocks?
I've only ever used it to watch variables, but I don't know. Hop on Pry right now and type up. It'll be fun. Okay, so last time I gave this, I realized that the edit command is really cool and I should be using that. I have not updated the slides, so we'll just skip right past this and say learn edit. It wasn't set up on our machines, so I haven't played around with it a ton. But a lot of these methods will let you kind of edit on the fly and play around with stuff with or without an editor. And so I use these pretty regularly, actually, and I'll kind of maybe give you some examples of how. So one that's pretty obvious is history. If you want to see the history of the commands that you've typed in the command line, this will do it for you. So you can see like, oh, I created this dummy object. I want to create a new one. This will let you do that. History has a lot of flags so that you can display, the first n items, or maybe you just want to see lines that match a given pattern. You know that like 100 actions ago, you crazy thing with your GitHub gem, so you can grep for that and find out what that command was. You can exclude pry commands from the history if you want, which is pretty handy, but just kind of useful. What I use this most often for, the edit stuff, is to define methods on the fly for a few reasons. So in this case, Gordon Friedman never talks in Half-Life at all, and so it is only fitting that he has a method to express how stoic he is. Maybe in a real world example, maybe I want to create some method that's going to sanitize some input or something, and I want to test it a bunch of different ways, but I don't want to editor and then come back and run the code again. It's more fun and more handy to me to be able to define these on the fly and kind of play around. So in this case, you just start typing your method, and you'll notice this two indicate that you are currently working on that. And you can define the method, and then if I do ls, you'll see that it's actually a method on this particular instance. It doesn't really, that I've seen, let you define it on the, although I wouldn't be too surprised if he said like class Gordon Freeman and then define a method or something, that it would work and it would let you actually add that onto the class. Sometimes I just want to test this on some instance, and then I can call that method and it works fine. Another great use for this that I've done a lot is, or recently anyway, is we had at work, we were working on some delayed job email templates, and it was a super pain. We wanted to be able to just like quickly reset some columns in our database because we were testing that they would send all unsent emails in one kind of batch job. And so what we did is wrote a quick method that was just called do it. And what it did is it went and changed a bunch of records so that they would be picked up by the delayed job and then queue the job. So if you find yourself doing something repetitive while you're developing, automate it with Pry, and that way you can save a few extra seconds. We ended up calling the method close to 100 times, it felt like, and that would have sucked to do that all manually, flipping that in MySQL Pro or something, right? While you're defining methods, there's a few things that are helpful if you make mistakes. So in this case, I'm having Gordon Freeman say his name, and oops, I put Master Chief, another video game protagonist. So I can type show input and see what I have already typed in. And then I can say amend line 2 and change that. So if you're, there's a lot of times where you'll like be defining a method or something and make a mistake, and shoot, I screwed up. I better Control C until I get out of there and then try again. Well, with amend line and show input, you can get rid of, you can save the day and change it in line. So another part of that is this is all basically put into an input buffer. And so if you want, like you mess up and then you realize, you know what, I don't really care, I'm just gonna move on, you could just type exclamation point and that'll clear your buffer and get you back to your regular old Pry. So no more Control C all the time to get out of stuff. All right, Pry also has some pretty cool built-in documentation stuff. The one that I use most frequently is show source. And this is, again, super handy if you're integrating with third-party library, where you can say like, I want to know how this API call is getting made, something's going wrong. And so I could say show source, switch weapon. In this case, I'm in the context of Gordon Freeman. And I would be able to see like the actual lines of code that are involved in that. It tells you if it's public, who the owner is, and even where it's defined, which is super handy if you don't want to open up your editor and go mess around with it. You can also specify a class. Like maybe, in a lot of cases, you'll probably have a lot of methods that are similarly named. Think of a controller action where you might have, create in a bunch of different areas. If you want, you can specify a class and the method on it just to get yourself a little bit more specific. So again, really handy. You can actually, I believe, even just show the source of the class if you, want to see the whole thing. So right here's a very simple program. Again, really handy for third-party libraries especially, and if you're not really keen to open up your editor and go find this code that you're dealing with. All right. Traverse around like a pro. So remember how I said earlier that you don't want to just toss bindings everywhere willy-nilly? There are ways to add breakpoints at runtime as you're debugging. And so what you do is you set a breakpoint maybe early on in execution, and then you define, you kind of get some more context on the problem, and then create breakpoints later that will allow you to, add stuff as you go, and maybe, and actually you'll see, like, I'm sure people have done like binding not Pry if some ID is true or whatever, right? So breakpoints can be conditional. We'll see that. You've probably used continue before, but there's also next and step and finish and different ways to execute to a point that you want. So step, lets you go into the next line. Next is actually within your current stack frame. And then we'll talk a little bit about up and down, which is one of my favorite parts, and kind of why I actually got the idea for this talk, is I used that and blew Brandon's mind one day at work. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty cool. So let's talk first about break. If you type help break, it gives you a lot of cool examples. So in this case, as you can see, there's lots of ways that you do it. So maybe I want to break at the start of a class when it's actually running, or I want to break at this method if some variable is true. You can break at a line. You can break at a line in a certain file. You can break if there's some condition. In this case, if you look at 6th line down, we're adding or changing a condition. So maybe I break on something and it never breaks, and I'm like, that's interesting. So I'm going to change it so that I'll break on a different condition. You can also disable breakpoints, delete breakpoints, and so this is super helpful. Rather than anticipating maybe where you need those bindings at first, you can add them as you go, allowing you to stop at different locations. So in this case, right, I'm showing a couple examples. I'm going to break at head crabs alive in this method, and it shows me, all right, here's your breakpoint. It kind of shows me the method too, so I know kind of what I'm breaking at. And then if I hit continue, it'll tell me, you've got to this breakpoint. It's the first time you've hit it. And it will, stop you there. So it's kind of cool too, where if you maybe want to keep track of how many times you're hitting some method, it'll keep like a nice little list for you. Up and down is, like I said, probably one of my favorites. And I'll give you, this example here maybe is a little simple, but I'll give you an example in a Rails app. Say you have a breakpoint in a model somewhere. Maybe it's in like some callback while you're doing a create or something. What's really nice is that with up and down, you might realize as you're in there, it got a parameter wrong. Why is that? You can go up to the controller action that called that method, or you could go up to the view that is being, or down to the view that's being displayed. And you can actually like change where you're at in the execution as you go. So you might say, I have this problem in the model. Really, I go up to my controller and find out, oh, my controller wasn't passing a parameter correctly. So again, super, super helpful as you're trying to figure out, what caused this problem. Rather than kind of guessing, you're able to jump around to different parts of your code. And so in this example, I have this loop that's going on, and I want to be able to go up from my method back up to the loop and then go back down to the method. So unfortunately, in Rails, you do have tons and tons of middleware that fits in the middle of that, so sometimes you're typing up a lot in order to do that. But super cool, really handy. Pry is configured through a Pry RC, much like you configure Bash or Z Shell or Fish or what have you. You can also configure it at runtime, which I have not found any use for yet. But theoretically, if you wanted to, you could change the colors and the prompt and all this stuff as you're executing. Cool, I guess. If you've been doing Ruby for a little bit, you probably remember that you used to be able to just say C or S or N or R to do things. Those were aliases. So Pry supports aliases, and you can add those back in because no one likes typing extra characters. And that would just go inside your Pry RC. So they actually have some documentation on how to configure that. And there's lots of built-in aliases. So the one that I probably use the most often is the @ just to do a quick where am I. But also, if anything goes terribly, terribly wrong, just type 3 exclamation points, and that'll get you out of there quick. Yeah. So that's one that I didn't talk about, but you can actually set up so that you can clip a GIS real quick and send it up to GitHub. So I mean, I've actually only really scratched the surface of some of these. One that you really should look at that will make it into another iteration on this top, maybe at Ruby Hack, is the play method. So play lets you kind of play back lines of code. So maybe you want to do the same thing over and over again, and like make some changes and then run it again. You can say like play lines 5 through 7 or something. Right. These are kind of a bunch of aliases. There's tons more stuff in there. I kind of covered the main things that I use fairly regularly. And yeah, that's Pry in a nutshell. I gotta say thanks to the lovely folks at Valve for making Half-Life, because I've totally taken all this stuff. I saw the Pry bar and I thought immediately Half-Life, so there you go. But yeah, there's tons of resources. These slides are available on my GitHub. I put them in Slack, so if kind of buzz through it pretty quickly. If you want to look back at some of the methods and things you can do, feel free to check that out. It's all written in Markdown, so if you want to submit a pull request, if you got something cool that you want to add to the talk, I totally take suggestions. But yeah, go kill some bugs. Any questions on anything? All right, sick.
Well, thanks again, Jason.
Yeah.
All right, next up we got Isaac. He's going to be teaching us how to make SSL free.
Yeah, but if you YouTube live conditions, it's no longer
going to be problematic. Okay, so
get a screenshot.
it is mirrored, it looks like, okay. It has to be in that square format, I guess.
No. It doesn't check Turn off the mirror.
Well, I probably won't.
That's fine. Do that anyway.
Scale.
There you go. And then keep views.
What?
That's it. You can look right here.
Oh, yeah.
The 720, 1080, whatever.
Well, they probably, yeah, I'll just do that. I just have to make everything bigger. I just do something. Well, cool. So, it looks like everyone's back from break, so I'm going. Oh, yeah, I got it. Cool. Screen sharing is happening. So today I'm going to be presenting on how to use Let's Encrypt, which is a project by like everybody basically. If you go to let'sencrypt.org, you'll see the major sponsors are like Mozilla, somebody I don't know, Cisco, somebody I don't know. Oh yeah. Okay, so OVH, don't know them either, kind of two in a row. Chrome, Facebook, Shopify, Vultr, Planet Hoster, Gandhi. So anyway, there's a lot of them, and you've heard of a lot of them. And they've all put up quite a bit of money into this. But generally the idea is if everything is encrypted, the entire web will be safer, and at the end of the day, that will be better for everybody. So to get started, you could actually go to documentation and click Get Started. I spent like many hours, many of them, reading through this, and it's not super obvious in a lot of cases, and there's so many other like third-party clients and stuff that have been written for it that it's a little confusing what actually needs to be done. So I wrote a blog on how to just quickly set this up for like your standard Rails site or just standard Nginx site. And it is just at isaacsloan.com. So I mean, if you go there, you'll see it as the first one, or just type Isaac Sloan and Let's Encrypt and it will come up in Google. The general idea is have a server, install Let's Encrypt. If you're using 16.04, you actually can do apt install Let's Encrypt, but the instructions, the steps for actually setting it up once you do that are like about 10% different than I've written down here. So we'll just go with like the old installation method that works for all other distros other than 16.04. And if I said 6 before, I don't know why. So I already did the first step here just because that takes a second. But let's go back over here. Too many tabs open. Could we turn these lights off by any chance?
Yeah, there's a switch.
And yeah, I also can increase the size, but it seemed like more than that was wrong with it. Okay, can everyone read that now? Okay, cool. So you'll recognize like, you know, this is standard Nginx. So I have my one ren.ws. If I go there, you'll notice it's not HTTPS. So if I go back to here, the first thing I'm going to want to do is add this to my default port 80 configuration so that when Let's Encrypt tries to validate that the domain actually does point to this server, it will respond with the encryption that it expects it to. It basically does that by putting a temporary file in a folder, which the server then expects to be there. So I'll just copy that and I'll come back here and hide that, hopefully. Is it still sharing? Okay, cool. So I'll just edit this. All this stuff is crap. Let's delete that. For things about PHP in there, we can't really have that. Oh, that looks better. Make sure that still works. Cool, it does. So then the next step, let's just get out of there. So I copied that. Let's go back over to here. Let's add the other location block. Format that a little bit better. There we go. So that's just saying, like, if it comes in with a location that exactly matches .well known, anything after that gets forwarded to these folders. So that is there. Go back over here. Make sure I'm in Bash. So then the next step is make that folder that we're forwarding to. Possibly that could have been the last step, but doesn't really matter. And then what we're going to do here is actually create a setup file for all of our domains so that we don't have to remember the command to type every time. It's a lot easier to automate in the future with like a cron job. So this way your Nginx, or this way your SSL will never expire because your cron job will keep it up to date. So come back here, create that folder and open this file. Copy all of this into the file. Let's set paste first. And then up here, you'll notice email is commented out. Let's uncomment that and try like, I don't know. And then domains, this is like a really important one because nothing will work without it. You can put as many domains, you can put up to 100 domains there, comma separated. So Let's Encrypt doesn't actually support, well, it doesn't support wildcard domains, but it does support a huge list of domains, so like multiple domain certs. So because you can very easily just add another domain to it, it's not that big of a deal that you can't just say everything, every subdomain of this domain counts. Because you just have to add it manually, but it's not that big. Exactly. Yes. Cool. So come down, save this, come back here, and then we have certbot auto. Cert only command tells it just create the certs, but don't try installing them. So far, it can automatically install them for Apache, but it won't do it for Nginx, and who uses Apache? So we're just using cert only, and then we're telling it with the -c command what configuration file it should be using. Kind of feel. Okay, let's actually restart Nginx before we do that. Okay, back over here, back over there. Okay, cross your fingers. Okay, agree. All of that stuff that came up is actually new. That never used to come up, but whatever. HTTP, ran.com, well known. So it's supposed to not come back with an invalid response, but correctly on DNS A record for that domain. IP address.
You need a well-known file?
I have that.
Read.com or .ws?
.ws. Thank you. That would be it. So that would be in the other file.
What was it? Wrong domain.
Yeah, wrong domain name. So that should be,
It's in your circles.
yeah, I'm just need to figure out, okay, yeah, so cd let's encrypt. Yeah, so one thing that's really important is actually having your domains right. You wouldn't really think that, but. Okay, let's run that command again and see if it works. One thing that you can do, okay, so this is actually what we wanted to see. One thing that you can do, so you don't have to actually agree to the terms and conditions there, is set up like agree, just like -- agree -TOS, so like -- agree TOS as one of the commands, and it will automatically do it for you. So if you're scripting it, sometimes that makes more sense to do. So you'll see right here, and I wrote that in here too. This is what you're expected to see, and it will then give you a path to your full chain right here. So in this case, like etc let's encrypt live example.com full chain.pem. So you'll notice if I go back here that we actually got pretty much exactly that minus the example.com. And so let's just copy that right there and go back over to the configuration.
So how many months does this cert last? 3 months? Is that
Last 3 months. I usually do it every 30 days though. So I'll just copy it into here for now. Oh, sometimes I can use Vim well, but okay. So then I added this right here to make this a little bit easier too, because we still need to be able to have the port 80 respond with the well-known thing. So I just combined it with basically listen on port 80, redirect to HTTPS if it is an HTTPS, unless it's well-known. In that case, respond with this. So I'll just pretty much copy this whole thing because it'll make my life a little bit easier. And put set paste in Vim. It makes it not do weird things when you try pasting a bunch of stuff in. So let's change the server name to ren.com.ws. Putting a dot in Nginx, putting a dot before something says respond to this domain or this domain with any subdomain. So it's easier than having to list multiple domains in the case that they're just subdomains. And then down here, I'm not actually having to tell it redirect to ren.ws. I'm just saying send it to whatever host and request URI came in. And then down here, ren.w. Yes. These right here, I'm just telling you which SSL protocols to use and which ciphers to use and not use. And then in this, I'm also adding a header that tells the browser to automatically try connecting with SSL. So in that case, even if I didn't have the redirect, in most cases, everybody would be using SSL. I still like to have the redirect though. So then come down here, take that back up here. And anything else? Control V in Vim lets you select large blocks and delete them. Good enough. And also comment them out. Seems good. There we go. So there's still a few more things. So this will give you an SSL cert that will be valid for 90 days. In order to renew that, you would have to run this command, basically certbot-auto renew -- quiet / no self -- no self upgrade. You could run that manually. I like putting it in my cron job. That command actually lets you run it like pretty much. I run it every day, and it only renews if like there's a reason for it to renew. Like if there's like a new exploit that somebody found or something like that, then Let's Encrypt will automatically flag everything as needing renewed, and then it will give me a new one. Otherwise, it will just say you're good. It will also renew automatically every 30 days in this case as well. So I just do it every night, and just in case there's a reason for it to renew. And that also it's easier to run a cron job for every night than every 30 days. So actually 30 days isn't really hard, but whatever. So in order to test that, what we would do, and this is actually a little bit weird, and they might have fixed this since I wrote the tutorial, but we need to actually comment out the domain line in the config file that I created. Otherwise, it tries like recreating those instead of just renewing them. And I know that if you do apt-get install Let's Encrypt, it doesn't actually do that, but that only works in 1604 at this point. So I'm still not covering that right now. So I'm just going to open that file up again and comment this line out, since we will never really need it again, unless we're going to add another domain, at which point we'll just run the create again. And okay, and back here, now I'll run the dry run, which well, one thing about Let's Encrypt is they'll only let you do 10 of them in a week. So you want to be careful not to just keep renewing your certs, or renewing works fine generally, but creating new ones is a problem because eventually yeah, you can only do 10.
Email account based, and so 10 per email account per week.
It's per domain.
Per domain.
Yeah.
Oh, if it's per domain, though, yeah, it's just so you're not.
Yeah. So here it should say cert not due for renewal, but simulating renewal dry run, performing following challenges, waiting for verification, generating key, congratulations, all renewals succeeded. So we're good there. So then let's just copy this right here. Run cron tab -e. What the hell? And really? That was like Notepad, but basically worse if that was possible. So pretty much I usually try to change these so everything I ever set up doesn't hit the server at the exact same time, just to try to be polite to them, but yeah, whatever. That'll do. And installing new cron tab. Now that renews or tries to renew every night. It will do the same thing that this did and say basically cert not due for renewal. It won't say simulating though. It will just basically say you don't need to renew. And now it will renew automatically forever. And you'll never have to worry about going and updating your SSL every year or whatever. And also it's free and supported by most of the cool guys on the web.
So what's, obviously this is completely awesome for personal use, for smaller projects, but even for enterprise or not, production stuff, it worked just fine. I mean, other than just a wildcard cert or something like that, when would you not use this in your opinion?
Well, in the case that it basically is easier to set up than any SSL I've ever had to set up before, like,
Open RSA.
yeah,
certs.
and with it having so much support and so many people out there that immediately report exploits, it seems like a lot of the other companies, like if they have an exploit, sure, you'll eventually find out about it, generally speaking, but they'll usually try to fix everything on their end and then kind of tell you like after everyone else has already announced it on their end. And so I feel like with this being readily used in the open source community, there's a lot more transparency in like what actually are exploits. So really, I think the only time you wouldn't want to use it would be in the case that you needed to have wildcard SSL, like in the case of like say a Tumblr-like thing where you needed to have subdomains just dynamically set up for everybody all the time or something like that. It would kind of suck to have to run some script in the background all the time to set that up.
Unless you have 100 max cap anyway, right?
Yes, and you have the 100 max cap. So I feel like in any case that isn't a limitation, you should always use it.
And the cert signed by Open,
Let's Encrypt, yeah.
Who's it signed by?
It's signed by Let's Encrypt organization. They also have another one for older browsers that they use as well, so that it will actually work with like IE7 and stuff as well. Because they partnered with somebody else that had like more of what's the word? Legacy recognition as well. But they're trying to switch everything over to their own CA as well.
I wonder if it'll work for the SSL issue that I talked about.
Well, I Googled that, and newer versions of Java from the last year do actually support it. But the version of Java you were running was like or not you were running, but the service that you were running against was literally like 8 years old.
Which is what I think was happening, is that they hadn't updated their system.
Yeah.
Which just blows me away, because it's a banking industry.
Yeah.
Then
that shouldn't blow you away.
Yeah, that shouldn't at all. I don't think anybody's here.
Actually, the only way I can work around is I made a separate website
Yeah, I remember that.
with no security on it, so that it could do the posts to the non-security.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going through like some weird Heroku thing for a little
I
bit.
did a bunch of different things. Well, I did it for Heroku first, but then I made my own thing.
Okay.
Because Heroku
Yeah.
would go to sleep on the line.
Yeah.
So this is totally awesome. Who here's never done SSL before? Good. That means you haven't shelled out hundreds of dollars a year. So that's really what this is.
For a really crappy product. All right.
Right, for somebody's stamp of approval on your website. I mean,
You don't have to remember to
because the problem is the cheap SSLs aren't accepted well in most browsers. You really have to use like a DigiCert or similar to have it be accepted everywhere. And what's the thing about that is, I mean, to do multiple, it's basically like $200 to $300 per single domain. That'd probably come. Yeah, that's an overfront but yeah, 70. Yeah, I think lower tier you can get there. If you need to do multi-domains or SAN domains or more than one, then wildcards are much more expensive. But it's really expensive, and it adds up if you're doing more than one entity too. I mean, any company that's doing sites on 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 20 domains, you're paying thousands of dollars a year in SSL. So to me, that's where it's really cool, because you're honestly paying for so much stamp of approval and nothing more. Like DigiCert has a wonderful business of not having to do very much for you.
Yeah. Well, another thing to keep in mind is once you get it installed, the little lock on your address bar, you want to make sure that that's all green and it's cool with it. Because you can still have it installed and sometimes have problems that
That's right.
One thing that I did with this merchant account project, initially, the website was up, the socket was, the SSL was just fine on it. But the merchant account, for some reason, was using, I think, Symantec to validate the domain. And Symantec, for some reason, just arbitrarily said it was, kind of thing, it was, lack of a better way of putting it, was a hostile domain. And I can't remember the exact terminology that they used, but they were basically saying that, it was like, installing viruses on your system when you come to my website. And so they would not let me go through the virtual account voluntarily. And all those vendors are submitting it to Symantec and saying, hey, look at my site, there's nothing here. All it was a landing page, it was straight HTML, there was no JavaScript, nothing on it.
Yeah.
It took them 2 days to get that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, just thinking back on like the last decade, like there's been so many nightmares with SSL. I mean, especially going back to the time when it used to actually be significantly slower as well. But even now, like one of the biggest hassles, other than the price you have to pay for it, is just the amount of time you have to spend like reading emails and looking in your spam folder for emails and like pulling them out and copying the stuff out of them and hoping there isn't weird characters in them and copying them into like Vim or something and combining them together. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Do you happen to know if you can use Let's Encrypt in a load balancer environment? Because obviously this works on the root in Nginx directly, but like most load balancers you use, you'd upload a cert there and have all the SSL be offloaded, so you don't actually have to do that.
Well, depending on what you're running your load balancer on,
Right.
if there's a way to configure certs, this literally gives you a private key and the full chain.
Okay.
So you could literally put, if you can put SSL in your load balancer, you could put that in there. You might not
just need to manually update.
Yeah, and you might, but even in some cases, if it was a Linux server or whatever, I mean, technically you could log in and set it up to like just put a file, update the files, because once
like ELB or something like that, you'd kind of be out of luck.
Yeah, probably. I actually, on the last load balancer I just actually used Route 53.
Yeah.
And just had that actually go between a whole bunch of servers based upon like load balancing and based.
You couldn't get into the shell there. 53, right?
Yeah, so on there, I basically just put the cron tab.
On intuition.
Yeah.
Just didn't offload the SSL.
And so I still actually had the same certs on all the machines, and it was fine. But it wasn't actually in the middle. Also, Cloudflare actually gives you free SSL at this point through Let's Encrypt. And I mean, they're just a DNS server, and they pretty much, it's kind of weird because it's actually SSL to them, but then still your server could be HTTPS, and we could still turn into SSL, which kind of seems like not quite secure somehow. But you're starting to see it all over the place right now. I mean, one thing that's interesting is if you go here and go to, I think, Get Help, Get Started. They like change this page all the time, but so they recommend CertBob, and then they literally have all of these that people have written in the open source community. Cool. So I mean, CertBot is like the one they wrote, but like there's so many. I mean, there's like bunch in Rails and Ruby. You can automatically like automate it through some web app process, and so there's a lot that you can do there in almost every language. So the default one's written in Python.
Awesome.
So I'm pretty sure that there is a solution out there for pretty much anything.
I'm sure there is for
more than just one other thing. So CD like etc, Let's Encrypt. This is where it generates everything. And in some cases, like if you messed up or you just tried regenerating again, in some cases it will leave the old ones and it will prepend the folder of your domain with like 001 hyphen your domain name. If that happens, you could just go change all your configuration to point to that, or you could just go and basically delete everything.
Cool.
And
Awesome.
just do it
Any
again.
other questions? Cool.
Thank you. I hope that helps somebody.
Awesome. Can you post a link to your website?
I posted that in Meetup.
Awesome.